What happened when a rich woman mocked an elderly black man at a glittering charity gala, not knowing the ground beneath her feet was about to shift? The Celestine Grand Ballroom of Chicago's Lucerne Hotel pulsed with false laughter and the metallic clink of champagne flutes, chandeliers spilling light like shattered stars across the polished marble. Velvet curtains framed towering windows, trapping the scent of fresh-cut lilies and old money in the heavy air. Beneath the swell of music and murmured deals, a quiet figure moved unnoticed. Walter Bryant, 74, brown skin weathered but dignified, wearing a modest navy suit that spoke not of poverty, but of purpose. As guests flaunted designer labels and pedigreed connections, Walter sat near the back, still as a mountain in a river of vanity. Then it happened. Victoria Langston's voice, honeyed and sharpened like a dagger, cut through the noise. A cruel remark about keeping the staff out of sight floated above the laughter, loud enough to draw a ripple of stares and tight-lipped smiles. Walter didn't flinch. He didn't have to. Because the night wasn't finished yet, and neither was the story of who he truly was, or who was about to step onto the stage to reveal a truth that would leave the whole room gasping. The string quartet played something delicate and forgettable as guests swept across the Celestine Grand Ballroom, their heels tapping the marble like distant gunfire. Beneath the golden storm of chandeliers, everything gleamed: smiles, jewels, lies. Servers moved in tight, rehearsed lines, balancing silver trays stacked with champagne flutes and shrimp canapes, careful to avoid brushing the flowing silk of gowns that cost more than a year's salary. In the center of the whirlpool, Victoria Langston stood like a queen surveying her court. Draped in scarlet satin, her diamond earrings catching every flash of light, she tilted her chin with the practiced ease of a woman who had never once been told no. 46, powerful, polished, and merciless in her hunger for control, Victoria had spent decades mastering the subtle language of social warfare. The glance that cut deeper than words, the smile that dismissed an entire room. Tonight was supposed to be hers. Her clients, her donors, her night. But somewhere near the back, in the table half shrouded by the massive floral centerpiece, sat Walter Bryant, and he didn't fit into her choreography. His suit was too plain. His shoes, though polished, were worn at the soles. His posture, too relaxed, too patient, made him stick out in a sea of people desperate to be seen. 74, skin deep brown against the crisp white of his shirt, silver hair cropped close, Walter carried himself not with arrogance, but with a stillness that unsettled the air around him. He didn't fidget. He didn't pretend to laugh at jokes that weren't funny. He simply existed, immovable as bedrock, while the storm of ambition raged around him. Across the room, Victoria's lips curved into something that might have been a smile if it hadn't been sharpened at the edges. She flicked her gaze toward a nearby guest, a silent command, and with one pointed whisper, she began to reshape the atmosphere. Heads turned. A few chuckled, low and nervous, unsure whether to join in or look away. The tension tightened like a wire pulled taut. Somewhere near the bar, a young man in a tux straightened, catching the change but saying nothing. The waitstaff felt it too, the way the temperature of the room shifted by invisible degrees. Walter, however, didn't move. He remained seated, his hands folded neatly on the table, his gaze steady and distant, as if he had already seen this play before and knew exactly how it ended. And somewhere deep beneath the velvet and the gold, something was stirring. Tonight would not be a coronation for Victoria Langston. It would not be another victory built on easy cruelty and silent complicity. No, tonight the script she thought she had written would be torn apart piece by piece, and a truth she couldn't control would rise in its place. The first act was ending. The real story, the one she never saw coming, was already beginning, and the room itself seemed to know it before she did. The tension snapped like a live wire the moment Victoria Langston tilted her glass and let her voice cut through the crowded ballroom like a scalpel. "You'd think they'd keep the help behind the scenes," she said, laughter dripping from her words, pitched just loud enough to carry across several tables. A few guests chuckled, the kind of tight, uncomfortable sound that said more about fear than amusement, while others froze mid-sip, their eyes darting between Victoria and the solitary figure seated near the back. Walter Bryant didn't flinch. He remained composed, his fingers tracing an invisible line along the rim of his water glass, his gaze unwavering and detached, as if Victoria's words had been carried off by the draft before ever reaching him. But they had landed, and they were festering. Victoria, sensing the slight tremor she'd unleashed in the room, leaned into it, swirling her wine lazily as if she were stirring the atmosphere itself. She turned to the couple seated nearest, her voice dipped in mock concern. "Bless his heart," she cooed. "Someone should tell him this isn't a maintenance banquet." A snicker erupted from a nearby table before falling flat against the heavy hush spreading outward. People shifted in their chairs, glancing at each other, silently weighing loyalty against decency. Near the bar, a young woman in a midnight blue gown stiffened, biting her lip, while her date muttered something under his breath about leaving early. Even the quartet stumbled slightly in their playing, the violin's note dragging a beat too long. Victoria didn't notice. She was too busy savoring her moment of casual dominance, too confident in her social armor to recognize the cracks forming beneath it. At her side, a seasoned donor, Mr. Lansing, a man old enough to know the dangers of underestimating silence, caught Walter's eye from across the room and offered a small, respectful nod. Walter, ever composed, returned it with a slight lift of his chin, the barest acknowledgement that he saw and understood far more than anyone assumed. The room itself seemed to pulse with something unsaid. Underneath the glitter and gold, the tables and smiles, a reckoning was quietly gaining momentum. Victoria, oblivious, crossed one leg over the other with a sharp snap of silk and diamonds, relishing her imagined victory, but others began to pull away from her orbit. Conversations shifted. Laughter grew stilted. The hostess glanced nervously toward the stage, as if hoping for a distraction. None came. Walter's presence, once easy to dismiss, now loomed larger with every passing second. He didn't need to speak. His silence was a mirror, and more guests were starting to see themselves reflected in it. Yet Victoria remained insulated in her bubble of arrogance, sipping from her glass, still convinced she was steering the evening. Still unaware that the tide was turning, not with noise or confrontation, but with the slow, inexorable certainty of truth breaking through velvet lies. And when it finally hit her, it would not be with a slap. It would be with a silence so deafening it would strip the room bare. The room no longer buzzed. It vibrated with something heavier, something raw. At first, it was just a few glances, small, seemingly insignificant shifts. A whispered comment near the dessert table, a sideways look from a server setting down a tray of lobster canapes. Victoria Langston noticed it, but dismissed it as nerves, the typical unease that always clung to charity events once the speeches started. She straightened her dress, tucked a golden strand of hair behind one ear, and let her eyes roam the crowd, looking for someone, anyone, to recenter the attention on her. But for the first time all night, the current of the room was flowing somewhere else, and she wasn't at the helm. Across the ballroom, a group of older attendees clustered near the wall of honor, their fingers tracing names etched onto the plaque in elegant brass. At the very center of it, framed in soft spotlight, was a photograph. A much younger Walter Bryant standing outside a crumbling community center, a hammer slung over one shoulder, a small boy clinging to his leg. Victoria caught the faint sound of a gasp from someone nearby and instinctively turned toward it. A woman in a navy gown leaned in close to her date, whispering fiercely. Words floated across the charged air: founding donor, Orion Tech, hero to the West Side. Victoria's smile faltered for the first time. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her wineglass. Surely they couldn't be talking about him. Walter, still seated with that infuriating calmness, adjusted the cuffs of his simple suit jacket, exposing worn shirt sleeves starched with precision. There was a gravity around him now, pulling at the edges of conversations, bending the room's invisible lines of attention. People were no longer pretending not to see him. They were recalibrating, reassessing, remembering. At a corner table, an elderly man with a silver cane spoke in low, reverent tones to a group of young professionals who leaned in, hanging on to every word. Another woman dabbed her eyes with a cloth napkin, shaking her head as if ashamed of herself. Victoria shifted again, suddenly too aware of her own laugh, too aware of the brittle sound it made when it didn't land the way she expected. Across the room, the MC was adjusting the microphone, preparing for the next part of the evening. Victoria seized the moment, focusing on the stage, willing the energy back to the script she had memorized, the one where she was untouchable, revered. But deep inside, something ugly gnawed at the edge of her mind, a terrible splintering question. What if she had misread the room? Worse, what if she had misjudged him? She stole another glance toward Walter, and for the first time, their eyes almost met. He didn't look away. He didn't need to. His silence pinned her harder than any words could have. Victoria's throat tightened. She looked away first, feeling, for the first time all evening, the subtle but unmistakable shift in power, as if the very foundation of the night was beginning to tilt under her feet. And the fall had only just begun. The lights dimmed just slightly, a subtle shift that rippled through the Celestine Grand Ballroom, like a collective intake of breath. Conversations stalled mid-sentence, glasses hovered halfway to lips. Victoria Langston turned toward the stage, her heart hammering faster than she would ever admit. She adjusted her posture, smoothing her dress, preparing herself for the keynote speaker. Finally, she thought, a return to order. A reminder of who truly mattered in a room like this. The MC's voice broke through the hush, rich and deliberate. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's keynote speaker is a man whose vision has changed not only this city, but the future of innovation itself. Please welcome Miles Bryant, CEO of Orion Tech Innovations. A low buzz swept the crowd, heads turned. Victoria clapped, measured and graceful, already rehearsing the compliment she'd offer when she found him later. But when the young man appeared, tall, poised, with a navy suit sharp enough to slice through the tension, he didn't walk toward the microphone right away. He paused, surveying the room with a quiet authority that needed no announcement. His eyes found a single point in the crowd. Walter, and when he smiled, it wasn't the polished smile of a CEO. It was something raw, more powerful. A son's smile. The air shifted again, tighter now. Victoria's palms prickled with sudden heat. She sat up straighter, the beginning of a knot tightening behind her ribs. Miles stepped up to the mic, but when he spoke, his voice was softer than expected. Gentle, almost reverent. Before I speak about innovation, I need to speak about foundation. About the man who made every step of my journey possible. A beat of silence, not a cough, not a shuffle. He lifted his hand and gestured toward the back. My father, Walter Bryant. For a moment, the world tilted. Victoria's breath caught, the blood roaring in her ears louder than the polite clapping that erupted around her. Number it couldn't be. But it was. And there was no rewinding what had already been said, no retreating from the spotlight that now bathed Walter in a glow far brighter than any chandelier in the room. Around her, guests turned in their seats to stare, not at Miles, but at Walter. Reverence replaced condescension, respect replaced dismissal. Victoria's throat felt dry as dust. Her fingers gripped the edge of her chair, trying to anchor herself against the rising tide of shame. Miles continued, voice steady, unwavering. While others chased titles, my father worked nights cleaning hospital floors just so I could chase dreams. While others chased wealth, he built legacy. Every word struck like a hammer, dismantling the carefully constructed image Victoria had crafted all night. She forced herself to look at Walter, but now he seemed impossibly larger, impossibly still, the room bending around him like gravity itself. The truth stood naked before her now, unmovable, undeniable, and Victoria realized, too late, that the only person invisible tonight was her, and the reckoning was just beginning. Victoria Langston sat frozen, the applause washing over her like a tide she couldn't swim against. She clutched her wine glass with trembling fingers, the once reliable armor of polished smiles and pointed laughter slipping from her grasp. Around her the room was shifting. Guests who had once hung on her every word now leaned toward Walter Bryant with a reverence she had never commanded, not even at her most dazzling. She was no longer the center of gravity here, and she knew it. Still, pride is a stubborn creature. It fought her, clawing at her chest, whispering that she could pretend none of it mattered, that she could sit still, smile tight, and let the moment pass like a bad storm. But another voice, quieter and far more dangerous, spoke beneath it. "You can't unmake what you said. You can only decide what you do next." Her legs felt heavier than they ever had when she finally pushed herself up from the chair. For a second, she thought about slipping out, just disappearing into the velvet-draped exits before anyone could notice. But too many eyes had already turned toward her, and worse, her own conscience had rooted her to the floor. Step by shaky step, she crossed the ballroom. No spotlight followed her, no orchestral score softened the air, only the sound of her heels against marble, loud and lonely. Walter stood near the stage, still talking softly with Miles, his posture easy, grounded. He hadn't gloated, hadn't even looked at her. Somehow that made it worse. Victoria hesitated, heart hammering, feeling the weight of the room press against her from every direction. She drew a shaky breath and approached. "Mr. Bryant," she said, her voice stripped of its usual polish, small and human now. Walter turned, and for a moment Victoria thought she might collapse under the calm, knowing gaze he offered her. There was no cruelty in his eyes, no satisfaction, just something sturdier, like a mountain that had weathered too many storms to bother fearing the next one. She opened her mouth, but for once words didn't come easily. "I owe you an apology," she finally managed, voice catching slightly. "What I said earlier was ignorant and cruel." Walter regarded her, not speaking right away, letting the silence stretch long enough to make her squirm. Then quietly he said, "Apologies a start. But what matters is what you carry forward." The words hit her harder than any rebuke could have. They stripped away the easy path she had hoped for, the one where a few pretty phrases could erase the stain of her actions. Growth demanded more. Action. She nodded, a true small nod, not for show this time. "I understand," she said, meaning it in a way she hadn't meant much else that night. Walter gave a slight nod in return, then turned back to his conversation with his son, dismissing her without malice, but with a finality she felt deep in her bones. Redemption wasn't a door she could walk through with a single apology. It was a path she would have to tread one step at a time, and the eyes in this room would remember how she walked it, or if she even bothered. As Victoria made her way back through the crowd, something strange happened. Some turned away, unwilling to offer her easy forgiveness. Others met her eyes, measured, cautious, assessing. The world hadn't ended, but it had changed, and for once, Victoria Langston understood that if she wanted a place in it, she would have to earn it the hard way. The night wasn't offering her absolution, it was offering her a mirror, and this time she didn't look away. The Celestine Grand Ballroom emptied slowly, like the last tide pulling back from a fractured shore. Chairs sat askew, abandoned glasses half full, forgotten place cards scattered like fallen petals across white linen. Yet Walter Bryant remained by the stage, a quiet sentinel in the fading light, while his son Miles stood at his side, hands tucked loosely in his pockets. Around them, the few guests who lingered did so with purpose now. Not to gawk, not to posture, but to pay quiet respects, nodding, murmuring words of real admiration they had once reserved only for titles and tailored suits. Victoria Langston watched from a distance, no longer the gravitational force she had once imagined herself to be. She wasn't ignored. No, that would have been a mercy. She was seen, measured, and, for the first time, understood in ways that made her skin feel too tight for her bones. There was no polite applause now to mask the truth, no desperate laughter to drown out the echo of her own careless words. Just the slow, steady weight of consequence, and the even slower opportunity for change, if she was brave enough to take it. Somewhere near the ballroom's edge, a young intern recorded a snippet of Miles's speech on her phone, posting it to social media with the caption, "Real success is built on invisible shoulders." Within hours, the clip would flood timelines across the country. People would watch, then re-watch, the moment Miles gestured to Walter. They would see a room full of wealth and pretense freeze in realization. They would hear the tremor in Miles's voice when he spoke of sacrifice, of unseen hands building futures without ever asking for applause. And across thousands of screens, they would see Walter Bryant, still, calm, powerful without needing to raise his voice, a living monument to a truth too often forgotten. That greatness doesn't shine under spotlights, it shines in silence, in service, in love. The video didn't go viral because of outrage. It went viral because it pulled something rare and aching from people's hearts. The reminder that behind every triumph stood sacrifices never photographed, never praised. In comment sections and private messages, strangers shared their own Walters. Janitors, grandmothers, fathers, bus drivers, forgotten heroes who bent the world quietly into a better shape for someone else. Walter never saw the numbers rack up. He wasn't on social media, didn't crave the fleeting noise of viral fame. But Miles printed a handful of the most moving comments and brought them to Sunday breakfast, reading them aloud over steaming cups of coffee. Walter listened, a small smile ghosting his face, and finally said, almost to himself, "Funny, isn't it? People only seem to hear the music once the last note fades." Miles smiled. "Yeah," he said, "but sometimes, Pop, that's when they really listen." In the end, the night didn't end with a grand standing ovation or a shiny plaque handed out under chandeliers. It ended with something far more valuable, a permanent shift in how people saw and who they chose to notice. The real lesson of that night whispered louder than any speech. True worth doesn't demand attention, it simply waits, knowing that those who matter will see it eventually. If this story moved you even just a little, remember the invisible giants in your own life, the ones who lifted you higher without ever asking for thanks. Take a moment today. Say thank you. Say it now. And if you believe the world needs more stories like this, stories that remind us who we are and who we should be, subscribe to X Daily Stories. Hit that like button, join our growing family, and let's keep these powerful truths alive, one story at a time.